Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a hidden 10,000-year history of how money has consistently been used as a tool to control power. It's an absolutely fascinating story of human ingenuity, trust, and, well, a whole lot of manipulation. We're going to trace the history of currency from ancient temples straight to that digital wallet on your smartphone right now. Let's get into it.
Now, you know the story, right? In school, we're universally taught that before money existed, people just bartered. You traded your chickens for someone else's grain, everyone shook hands, and everyone was happy. Sounds like a perfectly logical first step for human civilization, doesn't it? But here's where we really need to question that classic childhood story. Over the last century, anthropologists have scoured the globe, and you know how many societies they found that actually relied on a physical barter system? Exactly zero. Zero! It's a total myth. In reality, money didn't start with physical trading at all. It actually began about 5,000 years ago in the temples of ancient Mesopotamia purely as a system for keeping score. People just kept track of who owed what to whom using debt ledgers recorded in silver. So money wasn't invented to buy things. It was literally invented to keep score. To understand this evolution, here's our roadmap for today. We'll start with the myth of barter, then look at coins, power, and debasement. From there, we'll hit paper money and inflation, abandoning the gold standard, the era of fiat money, and finally wrap up with Bitcoin versus digital currencies.
Part 1. The Myth of Barter. You see, the very moment humanity invented this concept of keeping score with debt ledgers, people realized they could completely manipulate the game for their own benefits. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact 10,000-year blueprint we're going to see repeating over and over again in this explainer. It is an inescapable four-step cycle. First, a new form of money is created. Second, the public builds trust in it. Third, political power steps in, captures the system, and quietly drains its value. And fourth, the currency entirely collapses. I really want you to keep this exact cycle, creation, trust, manipulation, and collapse, in the back of your mind as we travel through history, because you're going to see it everywhere.
Part 2. Coins, power, and debasement.
So around 600 BC, in a kingdom called Lydia, which is in modern-day Turkey, kings began stamping official coins made of electrum. This permanently linked the abstract idea of money directly to political power. But running an expanding empire, like the Romans did a bit later, is wildly expensive. So Roman emperors used a sneaky trick called debasement. They'd recall the silver denarius coins, melt them down, mix in cheap copper, and then reissue them at the exact same face value. They basically magically created new money out of thin air to fund their empire. And right there, that kicks off step 3 of our cycle, manipulation.
And here is the crucial point. By the year 270 AD, that once majestic Roman denarius coin, it had barely 5% of its original silver left. 5%. They had literally drained the value out of the money. And the result? Prices skyrocketed, hyperinflation took hold, and the entire Roman economy suffered. The four-step cycle completed itself in a catastrophic, total collapse. Moving on to part 3, paper money and inflation. Jumping forward to the 11th century, hauling heavy copper coins for everyday trade in China's Song dynasty became a massive headache, like a real logistical nightmare. This led to a super convenient new invention, paper receipts. When the famous explorer Marco Polo actually saw Kublai Khan's system in action, he was absolutely stunned. He enthusiastically described it as like magic, turning ordinary paper into wealth. People trusted it. Boom, step 2 of our cycle secured. But paper has a fatal flaw, doesn't it? Unlike melting down metals, paper is just incredibly easy for rulers to print endlessly. And endless printing completely destroys value, resulting in, you guessed it, another inescapable step 4 collapse. The Ming dynasty eventually had to abandon paper completely. And we saw this exact same cycle repeat much later in 1923 Germany. Inflation got so unbelievably bad that people were actually burning stacks of cash just to stay warm, because the paper notes were literally cheaper than firewood. But as we know, power is incredibly creative. During the Renaissance, the church declared that charging interest was a strict sin. Well, the powerful Medici family in Italy needed a workaround. So instead of physically moving metal around, they turned money into an invisible, fast-moving network. A merchant would deposit money in Florence, and the Medici cleverly hid their interest and profit inside the currency exchange rate, paying out in a completely different currency months later over in London. They made money untrackable and highly profitable, completely bypassing the rules of the time. It's just a fascinating display of how those in power constantly adapt the rules of the money game. Part 4. Abandoning the gold standard.
Okay, so to stop governments from endlessly printing paper, the world eventually tried tying those paper notes to actual physical gold. The absolute peak of this idea was the 1944 Bretton Woods Agreement, which pegged the US dollar directly to gold and the rest of the world's currencies to the dollar. But did it stop our four-step cycle? Nope. Fast forward August 1971. The U.S. had printed way more dollars than it had gold, mostly to fund the Vietnam War. So President Richard Nixon went on national television and announced he was temporarily suspending the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Well, that word temporarily became history's biggest joke. That single announcement permanently broke the relationship between global money and physical assets.
Part 5. The Era of Fiat Money.
Welcome to a world defined entirely by fiat money. That means currency backed by zero gold, running strictly on government promises. And since 1971, the US dollar has lost over 80% of its purchasing power. 80%. The number printed on your bill looks exactly the same today, but every single year it buys you less. If you think about it, this is the exact same Roman emperor trick of mixing copper into silver that we talked about earlier. But today, we politely call it monetary policy. We are currently sitting right in step 3 of the historical cycle, manipulation and the draining of value. The true fragility of this fiat system was completely exposed back in 2008. The housing market crashed and giant 150-year-old institutions collapsed in a single weekend. And how did the authorities respond? Governments literally just pushed buttons on computer screens to print trillions of dollars out of thin air. They bailed out the very banks that started the crisis, while ordinary people lost their life savings and their homes. This collapse of trust clearly revealed modern power dynamics, bringing us right back to the brink of step 4 in our historical cycle.
Part 6. Bitcoin versus digital currencies.
Right in the middle of that 2008 crisis, a really deep question emerged. Why do we continue to trust these central institutions with our hard-earned money? On October 31st, 2008, a blueprint for Bitcoin was published by Satoshi Nakamoto. It was a system designed to take us back to a shared public record and break that 10,000-year manipulation cycle once and for all. Of course, governments noticed the rise of digital money and decided to create their own versions. And this perfectly illustrates the stark contrast between the two digital futures we're hurtling toward right now. On one side, you have Bitcoin, decentralized, mathematically capped at exactly 21 million coins, and private. On the completely opposite side, you have CBDCs, or central bank digital currencies. These are directly state-issued, with unlimited printing capability, and they are highly trackable. Authorities could even program CBDCs to have expiry dates, essentially forcing you to spend your money to stimulate the economy. One of these options breaks the historical cycle, while the other leans right into it. And so we arrive at the end of our explainer. For 10,000 years, the design of money has constantly dictated who holds the power. As our money inevitably transitions entirely away from paper and completely onto our phones and our screens, we really have to ask ourselves, in our digital future, whose hands will control the power? Will we finally break the four-step trap, or will it remain with central authorities, just repeating that exact same historical cycle of the Roman emperors? It's a fascinating thing to think about. Thanks